On a wet November afternoon, with rain fretting at the window panes and the whole house smelling faintly of lemon polish and old paper, David found a folded letter tucked into the spine of a cookbook he and Emma had never used. It was small, worn at the edges, and addressed in Emma's careful hand, "For David, if you ever need to know." That single line pulled him through the room like a key through a lock. In 35 seconds the ordinary world he had lived in for 15 years began to rearrange itself around one secret sentence. What followed would test the shape of their marriage, ask them to forgive what was hidden, and teach a whole neighborhood how to listen. They had the kind of marriage everyone thought they knew. David woke early, made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and left for the office with a kiss on Emma's temple. Emma fixed small things, a loose button, a stubborn window latch, a garden that never quite forgot to bloom. They argued rarely, and usually over small stubborn facts, whose turn it was to mow the lawn, whether the blue chair was better near the window. In photographs their smiles were easy, the kind the world reads as proof of an ordinary, settled love. But Emma kept a drawer in the hallway chest that rarely opened. It was the sort of drawer that houses unread postcards and brittle receipts. Inside was a thin metal box with a key, and inside the box there were letters, train tickets, a faded hospital bracelet, and the envelope David had found. When he slid his finger under the flap and read the first line, "If you are reading this, I chose to tell the truth in ink before I could say it out loud," his hands betrayed him. They were steady, but his breath was not. Emma had not been distant in an obvious way. She volunteered at the school, baked for the neighbors, and remembered anniversaries with the kind of precision David admired. Yet there had been nights she stared at the ceiling for longer than he did, and mornings when her coffee stayed untouched while his cup emptied. She took calls sometimes, speaking softly into the phone and pressing palms to her stomach as if holding a flame. He had not asked. He had loved the calm she offered and, in gratitude, left some guilty corners unexamined. The letter was a map of a past David had only guessed at in the quiet corners of their home. Emma wrote about a life before him, a young woman named Emily who left everything at night, a small town with too many quiet doors, and a man whose anger sounded like thunder and stayed like frost. She told him, plainly and without melodrama, that she had once fled. She had taken a train with nothing but a backpack and a baby swaddled against her chest. She had changed a name to save a life. She had lied about who she was to get a new job, avoid old questions, and keep safe the child she wanted fiercely to protect. She had also hidden more than a past. Emma had hidden fear and shame, yes, but also kindness and courage. The letter described nights in shelters where she had learned to cook for a dozen people on nothing, afternoons sewing quilts for children who still smelled of their old homes, and years when she had secretly sent clothing and small checks to women who could not yet leave. She never asked for thanks. She never told David because she feared that her past would unravel the fragile pattern of their life, that the truth would frighten him away, or that he would see in her scars something other than human strength. When he finished the letter, David walked through memory in a different light. He remembered Emma refusing to lock the door some nights, her hands trembling as she folded laundry. He remembered an awkward pause when a neighbor mentioned a summer shelter drive and Emma's eyes lingered longer than they should. The house, once his map of certainty, now felt like a place where rooms kept their own stories. He waited for her that evening, the letter folded into his pocket like a small, sharp stone. When Emma walked through the door at 6 with a bag of groceries and the same tired smile, he was not the steady man she expected. He sat her down at the kitchen table and placed the letter between them without a preface. For a minute the air filled with everything they had not said. Then he watched as color moved across her face, not shock, but a slow and weary relief, as if she had been carrying a sack of bricks and had finally let it lie on the porch. Emma did not sweep the moment away. She took his hands and told him, in the same steady voice she used to read stories to their daughter when she was small, why she had not spoken. The truth was not a single sharp event but a string of choices, to protect a child, to hide from a man who could not be trusted with new names, to build a life brick by careful brick. She told him about the long nights in cheap apartments where sleep was a scarce commodity and every decision measured for risk. She told him how, when she met David years later at a community bake sale, she had fallen slowly, like rain seeping into dry earth, and for the first time, she had believed a life could be safe. There was a moment when David felt betrayed. It rose like smoke. Why keep this? Why not trust me? The question was natural, it was also incomplete. As Emma spoke, he saw the real axis of her silence. It had not been an attempt to deceive him for advantage, it had been a shield, built out of terror and tenderness. She had been ashamed, not of her past, but of the thought that her past might make him leave. It was an honest fear in a world where people sometimes flee from the hard things. But the letter had more than memory. It contained names and addresses of places Emma had quietly supported, a small women's shelter 3 towns over, a scholarship fund for girls escaping dangerous homes, and a list of donated items tucked into their garage under a tarp. For years, she had mailed money and clothing in the night, signed only with a first name, or no name at all. She had created a quiet safety net, not just for herself, but for others. This made the secret heavier and lighter all at once. He realized that her silence had been an act of protection not just for herself, but for many. The next days were a geography of small, careful gestures. David picked up the envelope from the table and read the letter many times until the ink seemed to settle into his bones. Emma sat with him as he read, sometimes stroking his sleeve, sometimes quiet. They went to therapy, 2 sessions, then weeks of it, not because they had failed, but because the truth had rearranged the rooms and they wanted the help of someone trained to build new walls. In therapy they learned to ask questions without accusation and to answer questions with patience. They learned that a secret kept to protect could still betray trust if it grew into an island. Emma showed David the shelters she had helped. She introduced him to women whose hands had once trembled with fear and were now steady with work. There was a woman named Rosa who sewed children's clothes in exchange for English lessons. There was a teenager named Mia who could draw portraits from memory and dreamed of becoming an architect. In the faces of these women David understood why Emma had done what she did. The secrecy had come from love, a complicated, human love that did not fit neat expectations. The story did not resolve in a single evening. There were nights David replayed the letter and felt the old sting. Emma had to be patient. Trust, once bent, must be mended slowly. Yet the more he watched her in the light of her actions, the more he felt a new shape of respect grow. He saw courage where once there had been only a mystery. He learned that knowing someone's whole past does not make them less lovable, it makes them more human. Together they took the next steps outward. Instead of letting the secret become their private shame, they turned it into a public act of healing. They joined the shelter's board, organized a neighborhood fundraiser, and used their small social influence to speak at community centers about how to notice a neighbor's quiet signs. Emma spoke once, halting at first, then with growing steadiness about the messy freight of secrecy and the power of helping hands. David spoke after her, raw and honest, explaining how he had been blind in comfort and how he had learned to listen. These actions did more than repair their marriage. They started conversations in the town about privacy, trauma, and the meaning of support. A school counselor wrote to them, thanking them for a talk that helped a student reach out. A neighbor who had never spoken about a violent ex finally found a place to sleep for her and her children. The money Emma had sent anonymously for years began to be matched by people who felt moved by the story. Where once there had been shame and silence, there now flowed a small river of help. There was a twist no one expected. Months later, while sorting the garage, David found a small packet of letters Emma had never mailed. They were addressed to the child she had left behind, to the man she had escaped, to herself at 20. Emma's hands trembled as she explained she had written them as a way to let go. They contained confessions, apologies, and the hope that the people she had loved and been hurt by would find peace. The twist was this: the truth had not been a ruin, it had been a seed. Each letter planted something that would grow differently according to how people received it. Time passed and the raw edge of discovery wore into a softer memory. The trust between David and Emma did not return to the naive certainty it once had, but it settled into a stronger, more honest pattern. They argued more openly about money, about vacations, and about who would wake at night with the baby when their granddaughter was born. They held each other in harder moments because they had been forced to learn how to do so. Their daughter, Lucy, noticed. She watched her parents become realer with each other and carried that lesson into her own friendships. Friends reported being kinder, as if the town's empathy had been watered by Emma and David's openness. There were failures too. An old friend reacted with pity rather than understanding and drifted away. Some neighbors whispered, "Gossip is the loom upon which secrets are easily woven." Emma felt the sting of judgment at holiday gatherings, but she no longer tried to hide. The letter had released her, and the world would take what it would from that. On the anniversary of David finding the letter, they returned to the small park where they had first met. They walked slowly under trees that had learned to keep leaves a little longer. Emma slipped her hand into his without fuss, and for a moment silence said what words could not. The same two people who had loved and been frightened had learned to accept the whole of each other. The letter that had once been a wedge lay framed on a shelf in their study, not as an accusation but as a map of who they were together. If there is a question I want to leave with you, the viewer, it is this: how many truths sit folded in the drawers of the people you love, small, heavy things that make up whole maps of life? What would happen if, instead of letting fear keep us silent, we learned to ask and to listen, to turn secret pain into public support? Moral of the story: secrets are often shields made of fear. When the shield is lowered in trust, it can reveal pain, but it can also reveal courage, compassion, and the chance to help others. Trust grows not from perfect honesty at once, but from steady steps, listening, forgiving, showing up. When we move from shame into action, hidden stories can become the beginning of wider healing. If you know someone who carries a quiet truth, listen without judgment. If you carry one yourself, know that courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is a folded letter, and opening it is the first step toward a kinder world.